Hi everyone, this is Priya Vashni and I welcome you all in the new session. In this video, we are going to cover one of the most important theory given by Plato, that is his theory of justice, right? So before going into the exact theory given by the Plato, let us first figure out what is justice. So justice is basically one of the most important concept in political philosophy. According to John Rawls, who is one of or who is actually famous for his theory of justice. So according to John Rawls, just like truth is the first virtue of any system of thought, similarly justice is the first virtue of a social system, of a social system, right? So justice is basically considered a precondition for the harmonious coexistence. So this is one of the most important concept. You will read a lot about justice in political science, and this is also one of the most important topic for the PSIR exam, right? So for the harmonious so justice is basically considered as a precondition for the harmonious coexistence. Is it clear? So here we have very briefly discussed that what is justice. So this is, you can say, this is one of the most important concept in political philosophy. And according to John Rawls, just like truth is the first virtue of any system of thought, similarly justice is the first virtue of a or of any social system. Is it clear? Okay. Now, let us dwell into the nature of the concept of justice as explained by Plato. So, sorry for the spelling mistake here, right? So, what Plato says, or what is the Plato's conception of justice, right? So, what Plato says is Plato does not treat the concept of justice in a very narrow or legalistic sense. Now, what do I mean by saying it? See, one justice, you can say, like there is a law which says that this is right and this is wrong, right? And and how you are defining justice? That okay, whatever is right according to law will be justified, and whatever is wrong according to law will not be justified. But Plato has a very broad conception of justice. He does not believe in a narrow legalistic sense of justice. What he says is he actually believes or he actually defines justice by the right condemn. So basically, Plato's theory of justice explains justice in terms of duty. Duty of whom? Duty of different classes, different classes living in the state. So we will understand this in very detail in this lecture. But what do I mean by saying different classes is I just want you to recall his theory of soul, right? What he has done is, in that theory, he has actually categorized people into three kinds of category. That is the man of gold, man of silver, and the man of copper. So similarly, what he's saying is that every category of these people has their different duties, and when they actually perform the duties which they should perform is basically justice as per the Plato, right? So we are going to understand all this in very detail in this lecture, right? Okay. Now, what is the methodology used by the Plato? As we all know, that dialectics is something which was proposed by Socrates. So dialectics is basically Plato has also used the dialectics only to prove his various points, be it be the theory of idea, be it be the theory of justice, be it be the theory of the philosopher king, right? So he has actually used the method of dialectics. And let me just remind you that what was dialectics. It was actually related to the logical arguments, right? So what it says is that when two people are involved in a logical argumentation, then the resultant, because what Socrates said that the real knowledge is unshakable. So through the arguments, the knowledge, or basically which is actually the illusion of knowledge itself, shakes away, and we are left with the true facts, or you can say true knowledge. So this was actually the method of dialectics. So as I said, that dialectics was basically the argumentation. So how Plato has used it? Okay, so there is this famous work of Plato, that is Plato's Republic, right? Plato is basically known for this book, for the work, the Republic. So you can also see you can also understand the importance of justice by seeing this subtitle. That even the subtitle of his famous work was a dialogue on justice. This itself implies the importance of this term justice for the Plato, right? So since this is a work, in this work what Plato has done is, Plato has actually various characters, right? He has various characters in his book Republic, and what he is trying to do is he's actually having conversation with all these characters, and he is trying to prove his point through this conversation, or you can say through the method of dialectics. Okay, now how he's doing it. So let me take you through some of these conversations, and then you will understand a little bit that how he is actually reaching to his theory of justice. So we will actually try to be as logical as we can, and we will actually try to think, or to actually, matlab, it's always better to understand things rather than only mugging up things, right? So what we will try to do is that we will actually try to understand it how Plato has reached this theory, right? Okay, so there was first character, which is Syphilis, right? So who was Syphilis? He was actually an old man, right? He was actually an old man who was paying, who was actually doing his duties, doing his duties, who actually believes in doing his duties and paying his dues, right? So this was actually the traditional concept of justice, right? Now when he so what happens is, when Plato asks Syphilis that, hey Syphilis, what is justice according to you? Then Syphilis says that justice is nothing but you should perform your duties and you should pay your dues. So this is what the justice was as per the Syphilis. Now there is a Plato's response. What Plato says? Plato says, okay, I accept your first idea of justice, that doing your duty is a justice, can be justice, but he asks Syphilis to elaborate more on this concept, that is paying his dues. That what do he understand, or what did he mean by saying that paying your dues is also a form of justice? So what happens is, Syphilis does not respond properly to Plato for this question. Then Plato actually goes to Polemarchus. Now who is Polemarchus? Polemarchus is basically the son of Syphilis, right? Polemarchus is basically the son of Syphilis. So what happens is, so so Plato has asked Syphilis that what do he mean by saying that paying your dues is a form of justice. Then he comes to Polemarchus. So what Polemarchus says is that paying dues implies giving treatment which one deserves. What he says is that dues, paying dues means giving treatment which one deserves, or in a very simple language you can say tit for tat, means be good to your friend and harm your enemy. This is what Polemarchus meant by saying paying dues, right? Now again there was a Plato's response. What Plato said is that no, I am not convinced with this idea. What he says is that justice can never involve the idea of harming someone. Justice can never involve the idea of harming someone. What he says is that concept of justice is basically linked with the concept of satisfaction, with the concept of satisfaction of the soul. Now, how can a soul can be peaceful or can be satisfied by harming someone? So, according to Plato, there is a possibility of wrong application because it is not easy to identify who is our enemy and who is our friend, right? Because we may consider uh, someone as our enemy because of our ignorance, right? So it is never a good idea to define justice uh, by saying like harm someone, right, or harm your enemy. So this is actually rejected by the Plato, right? So till now what has been accepted by the Plato, that doing your duties is something which Plato has accepted till now. Is it clear? While harming someone is something which Plato completely rejects. Now, the third and one of the most important character in Plato's Republic was Thrasymachus. Okay, so Thrasymachus is one of the most important character in Plato's theory of, or you can say in Plato's Republic. Now, who was Thrasymachus? He was a sophist. So if you do not understand who is sophist, then I have made a separate video in which I have actually given the strict distinction between sophist and the Socratic tradition. Then I'll request you to please go to that video and understand from there that who are sophists and what is the difference between the two traditions, right? Okay. So, but here also I will explain a little bit about them so that you can link things better, right? So who was Sophist? So Sophist basically represented the rival tradition of Socrates, right? Rival tradition of Socrates, right? So they actually believe that society is conventional. Society is conventional, while Socrates believed that society was natural, right? So, what sophists believe is that society is conventional, which actually means that it was created by man for his own convenience, right? Now, since society was actually created by man for his own convenience, then what Thrasymachus says is, so now we are going into the thoughts of Thrasymachus, right? So, what Thrasymachus says is that since it was created for the convenience of the individual, then it is very natural for the man to give preference to his own self-interest, to give preference to self-interest over the interest of the society, self-interest over the interest of the society, right? Because everyone believes that we need to lead a good life, right? We need to lead a good life. But as you also know that for sophists the means for good life was power, right? Money and power were the means for good life for sophists, because sophists were the first political educationists who actually were educating the political class, right? So for them, the means of good life was power, and society was conventional, and hence it is very natural for a man to give preference to his self interest before the interest of the society, or over the interest of the society. So so we are getting into one of the most important statement which sophist, or you can say Thrasymachus gave is, or you can say which actually represents the radical theory of justice, that is justice justice is the interest of the strong. Now, what is meant by this, right? So, what actually is meant by this is what they are trying to say is that justice is the interest of the strong. So, what happens is that who makes the rules, right? So, at a time, you can say that things were very legalistic, right? Justice was actually understood in a very legalistic sense. Then what is right as per the rules is, you can say, justice, and what is wrong as per the rules was not a justice. Now what Thrasymachus says is that who make these rules? These makes are being made by the ruling class, right? These rules are being made by the ruling class or those who are in power, right? And these rules actually become justice. Now, since we all know that sophist believes that since the self-interest is far more important than the interest of the society, then obviously this ruling class is going to make rules which are in self-interest, right? Which are in their interest. So what is justice for them is basically the justice of the strong, or the justice of the rule, or the interest of the ruling class. I hope आप समझ पा रहे हो इस statement को, that justice is the interest of the strong. How? Because rules are being created by the ruling class, and it is very obvious that ruling class will create rules in their self-interest. Why? Because sophists believe that the self-interest actually precedes over the interest of the society for a man, right? So similarly, since ruling class is also a human or a man, therefore they are actually creating rules which are in their self-interest. So basically there comes the concept of might is right. Might is right. This is something which sophists firmly believe, right? So, what Thrasymachus is trying to say is, since ruling class has made rules which are in their interest, then there may be situations when these rules are not in your interest, or are not in the interest of the people, right? So, it is preferable for man for not to follow these rules occasionally. So what Thrasymachus says is that it's okay if you are not following some of the rules, because if the rules are not in your interest. So this is how, according to Thrasymachus, a man can serve his interest much better, right? Now, can you recall something from this? I want you to recall the civil disobedience movement which held in India. So, what you can see is that the earliest idea of civil disobedience can be seen in the works of Thrasymachus, right? So, according to Thrasymachus, so long laws serve our interests, we should follow the laws. But there is nothing wrong in disobeying the law which goes against our interest, right? So, basically, sorry. So, basically, there are two prominent thoughts of Thrasymachus, right? Two prominent thoughts of Thrasymachus. Number one, that power is the means of good life. Power is the means of good life. And number two, it is not necessary. It is not necessary to obey all the laws. Necessary to obey all the laws. Okay. So Thrasymachus has said what he wanted to say. Now Plato is listening very calmly to his thoughts. Now he says, okay, you have said everything. Now listen to my arguments, right? So what happens is, actually Plato is unable to provide very strong counter argument to the thoughts of Thrasymachus. Reason being, Thrasymachus was telling what is rather than what ought to be, right? But still Plato tried to defend his point, right? Now, what arguments did Plato give? Plato said that ought should not be defined from is. This is something which is also said by Socrates, right? What he says is that it is true that in nature, might is right. Might is right. So what Plato says is that it is true that in nature might is right, but it does not mean that it should be the principle to be followed. What he says is that it is true that uh, it is true that in nature might is right, but it is not true that it should be the principle that should be followed. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to prove his point that ought should not be defined by what is. So this is right. So he's trying to say that it should not be the ought, right? I hope I'm trying to clarify these things to you, right? Okay. So what he says is that if we follow might is right, then there cannot be peace and harmony. There cannot be peace and harmony in the society, right? In the society, what he says is that we should not forget that it is the necessity. It is the necessity. So just look at the keywords. It is the necessity for a man to live in a society. So what Thrasymachus or sophists said was that society was conventional. And when they say society was conventional, they mean that it is man has created society for his own convenience. Then that also implied that it was not a necessity for a man. Right. So what Plato is saying is that it is the necessity, because Plato and Socrates considered that society is natural, right? So what they said that it is a necessity for a man to live in a society. Because why why it is a necessity? Because nature has not made man self sufficient, right? They It has not made man self sufficient. So we actually depend on each other or on nature, right? So it is very natural to live in the society. Now, when it is very natural to live in the society, then we cannot follow the rules which are followed in the nature. What he says is, so it is a fact that some men commit murders. So just look how beautifully Plato is trying to put his point. What he says is that it is true that some men commit murders. So this is something, this is right? But however, it will be illogical to say that we ought to commit murders, right? It will be illogical to say that we ought to commit murders. So this is how he says. Okay. So we, because why? Because it does not appeal to the reasons. So what Plato says is that ought should not be determined by what is. He says that the so since Plato has proved that it is a necessity to live in the society, so he says that the values which govern the social life, the values which govern the social life have to be based on the reason. Have to be based on the reason. And reason suggests that might is right cannot be the principle of social. And what reason says for Plato is that might is right cannot be the principle of social life, right? So next what he says is, this is how he has proved his argument that might is right cannot be the principle of social life. So we have seen that there were two main thoughts of Thrasymachus. Number one, might is right, and number two was that it is okay to disobey the laws. Now, what Plato says on that point? So Plato says that the soul of the person, the soul of the person who disobey the law can never be peaceful. Right? The soul of the person who disobey the law can never be peaceful as the soul of the person who follows the law. Right? So what he says is that power alone cannot give a good life, cannot give a good life. So reason is far more important. Thus, again, Plato says this, or he suggests that how we ought to live in a society and lays down the foundation of ethics. See, ethics hai kya? What is ethics? Ethics actually tells you some rules, or you can say some things, some rules, or some criteria which you should keep in your mind while living in a society, right? So this is how Plato also lays the foundation of ethics. Is it clear? Is it clear? Okay. Okay. I hope you have understood the thoughts of Thrasymachus and how Plato has actually defended his thoughts regarding justice, right? Now, the fourth character was the Glaucon, right? So, it can also be related, you can also relate it with the contractual theory or pragmatic theory of justice, right? So, what Glaucon said was that justice is the interest of the weak. Justice is the interest of the weak. Now, what does he meant by it? Just a minute. Okay, what does he meant by it? He says is that those what he's trying to say is there were two kinds of people, weak and the powerful, which actually denotes the ruling class, right? So what happened was, since there was a categorization like that in the society, then these people are weak, therefore they cannot defend themselves properly on their own, right? So what happened was, they came together and entered into a contract and entered into a contract. And what was the terms and conditions in that contract? That this powerful set of people, or the powerful, agreed that they will not harm the weak, harm the weak, while weak agreed that they will not criticize the powerful, criticize the powerful, and return these powerful people will give the protection, will give the protection to them, right? Is it clear? Now, again, Plato was listening to all these things. Now, what was the Plato's response to Glaucon? So, Plato has two main objections to it. Number one, Plato says that whatever Glaucon was saying implies that state is contractual or self-made, or man-made or artificial. So what Plato says is that all this thing is wrong, because according to Plato, state was natural. Number one. Number two, Plato says is that it is wrong to think that only weak requires a state. That only weak requires a state. Both weak and strong live in the state. They all require the state. Right? Okay. So, one thing to note here is that Plato has used some words like state, society, justice interchangeably. So, you may find these words used interchangeably in various texts. So, this is something you should know, right? Okay. Now, as we have seen various conversations between the characters of the Republic and between the Plato, so what features of the idea of justice we have derived so far as per the Plato. Number one. Number one is that number one is that justice is the feature of society. Feature of society, right? This is what we have derived at. Number two. Number two is that idea of justice has a linkage with satisfaction of the soul. This is how Plato actually proved Polemarchus and Thrasymachus wrong, right? That since harming your enemy will lead to a not peaceful soul, therefore it can never be the idea of justice. This is how he actually disagreed with Polemarchus, right? So, idea of justice has a linkage with the satisfaction of soul. Sorry. Okay. Third point is, let me just go to another slide, right? Okay. Uh, Sorry. So third point was we need reason to understand justice. We need reason to understand justice. This is what Plato has said. Fourth point was that justice is necessary. Justice is necessary for a good life. Is necessary for a good life. Number fifth point was that justice is a virtue of all virtues. Now, what does this mean? What he said is that achievement all of what he said was that achievement all forms of excellence is dependent on justice. Why? What he says is that when there will be justice, right? When there will be justice, there will be when there will be justice, there will be a peaceful soul, or there will be peace, right? And when there will be peace, only then there can be excellence, right? So he says that that justice is the virtue of all virtues, because if you want to get excel in any of the virtue, you first need the justice, because justice will result into a peaceful soul, which can only achieve the excellence, right? Sixth point was that justice has to do with the duty, right? The relation between justice and duty. Seventh point, a just soul is a happy soul. That is what I said. A just soul is a happy soul. And eighth point was that both weak and strong require justice, because even the strongest person is never strong enough. So both weak and strong require justice. So these were the 8 points which we can derive from our discussion that we had till now, right? Okay. Okay. Now coming to the main theory of justice, which was given by the Plato. So I hope you have understood the basics which Plato has derived from his conversations with the various characters of the Republic. Okay. So this is the most important statement which was given by the Plato in his theory of justice, that state is individual writ large, that state is nothing but an individual written large. So you can consider it as individual, and this is the state. So what does Plato meant by it? So we will understand this in detail, right? So Plato says what Plato is trying to do is, what he's trying to say is that the rules, right, which are being applied at the individual level, or the concept of justice which is applied on the at the individual level, same concept of justice can be applied at the state level, right? Is it clear? Okay. Now, getting back into that what actually Plato wants to do. So we are now trying to set the context for his theory of justice. So we all know that what Plato wanted, let me just change the color. So what Plato wanted was, Plato wanted to make Athens an ideal state, and for that he required the idea of the ideal state, right? Now, so where is the perfect idea of justice, right? So he said that it cannot be understood by observing the worldly ideas, because this is the world of imperfection. So what will be the perfect idea of justice? Perfect idea of justice. So according to him, it will be the God's idea of justice, right? So what? Let me explain it again. That Plato wants to make his motherland, that is Athens, an ideal state. For that, he needed the idea of the ideal state, and in order to establish the idea of the get the idea of the ideal state, it is very important to understand the idea of justice, right? So, where we can get the perfect idea of justice? Obviously, not in this world, because this world Plato considered as the world of imperfection. So, you can find the perfect idea of justice in the God's kingdom, right? So, God's idea of justice will be the perfect idea of justice. Now, how we can understand this? Obviously, by listening to the soul, by listening to the soul, right? Because we have, in the theory of soul, we have discussed how it works. So if you have not seen that video, then please see that video. I will give the link in the description, right? So by listening to the soul, now soul, why? Because soul is the part of the god, right? Now, what is, now there comes the concept of just soul. So according to Plato, only just soul can give the idea of the perfect idea of justice. But so we need to understand what did he mean by just soul. So to define the just soul, we have to understand the purpose of justice. We need to understand the purpose of justice. That why we are looking for this theory, right? So we have just read that justice is the virtue or excellence, right? And so to achieve excellence, we need peace and harmony, right? Justice is an idea of excellence, right? It is the first virtue. It is the virtue of all virtues, right? So to achieve excellence, what we need? We need peace and harmony. We need peace and harmony, right? So the now, who can live in peace with others? Who can live in peace with others? Only the person in whom reason dominates rather than appetite, right? Rather than courage. So, the person in whom reason dominates can only live in peace and harmony, right? Now, so what should be the God's idea of justice? God's God's idea of justice should be that reason should, just look at it how beautifully Plato is deriving at the conclusion. So reason should dominate over the other two elements. What were the two elements? Courage and the appetite, right? So have you understood that what Plato wanted to make Athens an ideal state? For that, he required the idea of the ideal state. Now, what is the perfect idea of justice? So for that, he said that okay, God's idea of justice is the perfect idea of justice. Now, how can you get that idea? By listening to the soul. And how will you or what kind of souls will be the just soul, or what kind of souls can listen to that idea. Just souls can listen to those ideas. Now in order to understand just soul, you need to understand what is the purpose of justice. So purpose of justice, justice is basically the virtue. So to achieve excellence we need peace and harmony. So we need to understand justice. Now who can live in peace and harmony with others? The persons in whom reason dominates, right, over the other two virtues, that is the reason, that is the courage and the appetite. So what is the God's idea of justice? So God's idea of justice is that reason should dominate over the other two elements. So this is how Plato has reached to the definition of the just soul. So coming back to his statement, which he said that state is individual writ large, right? So as you can see that he has now actually reached to the definition of a just soul, or to a just individual, right? According to him, who is a person, who is a just soul? The person in whom the reason dominates over the other two virtues. And as I said, that he actually says that whatever is applicable to at the individual level is also applicable to the state level. Okay, so now we will understand that how Plato has applied this principle to the level of the state. What he says is that categorize people basis the spiritual qualities, basis the spiritual qualities. So as we have seen in the theory of souls, he has actually categorized people into three categories. That is man of gold, man of silver, and man of copper, right? Now since what was the just soul, just remember what was the just soul? In whom reason was dominating over other two virtues. Therefore according to Plato, which will be the just state? Which will be the just state? In which the man of gold, man of gold will rule over, sorry, will rule over the man of silver and copper, right? Silver is I have just written the scientific notation, right? Okay, so I hope you are able to link these things, right? How he is actually saying that justice is individual writ large, because he is applying the concept of justice which he has just derived at an individual level. He is applying that concept at the state level also. So what he says is that in a just state, every class will perform the function according to the spiritual qualities of the soul. Since man of reason, or a person in which the reason was dominating was considered the man of gold, so they should be involved in rule making. The person who were the man of silver, their duty uh, was to ensure the security, because courage was a dominant characteristic. Their task was to ensure security. And the man of copper, since the you can say appetite was one of the dominant virtue in these people. So what he says is, okay, these persons should be involved in the task of production, right? So what Plato says is, so all should perform functions for which they are naturally suited. So in our previous videos as well, I have explained that Plato believed in the natural inequality, right? So what he is again trying to say is that these persons should perform duties or functions which they are naturally suited. So in this way, they will achieve excellence, or the state will achieve excellence, right? Okay, so Plato also says that okay, it is good to perform their own duties. Person should perform duties as per what they are naturally suited for. He also says that also they should not interfere. They should not interfere in the task of the other. So basically, indirectly, Plato is giving extreme powers to his philosopher king. Are you getting how? Because he has given the power of rule making to the man of gold. Man of gold is nothing but the person in whom reasons dominates, which is nothing but a philosopher, who is nothing but a philosopher. So what he's saying that these two persons should not interfere. No person should interfere in any other's task. So what it means that these should not interfere in the rule making. So this is how he's indirectly giving in indefinite or extreme powers to the philosopher king, right? So so the two fundamental principles of justice which we have just derived from the Plato's two fundamental principles of justice are, just note down these keywords, right? Number one, functional specialization. Functional specialization. And number two was non-interference. I hope you have understood these things, right? Non-interference. Okay. Now, so he has given this theory. Now the question arises that why all classes will accept this theory? Why people should accept this theory? So according to Plato, so my question is why all classes all classes should accept this theory, should accept this theory. Now again, what Plato says is that state is interdependent. Interdependent means no one is self sufficient. So man of reason, या फिर I can say man of reason will be dependent on man of courage, right? And man of appetite. Similarly, man of courage will be dependent of man of reason and man of appetite. Similarly, man of appetite will be dependent on man of reason and man of courage. Since everyone is interdependent, hence Plato believes that each class will recognize themselves the importance of the other class and treat the members of other class with respect and be obliged to the other class. So this is how he says that why all classes will accept his theory. So this is what the actual theory of justice of Plato. So in the next video, what we will do is we will actually write the answer, or you can say discuss the answer to the question that that justice is nothing but a state is individual writ large. The statement which was given by the Plato, we will try to answer that statement in the next video. So I hope in this video you have understood the concept of Plato's justice, right? Or Plato's theory of justice. So thanks a lot. If you like this video, then please share and subscribe. Thanks a lot for your time. Bye bye.